Thanks, Jackie. Good morning, I'm Councillor Rob Cribb. I'm Chair of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Management Board. Welcome to this remote meeting taking place on Tuesday, the 20th of April 2021, which is being recorded live to the Council's website and will be available to be viewed for a minimum of 6 months. Please be aware that any footage from the meeting can be used in subsequent media broadcasts. I'd like to give a warm welcome to members, officers and any members of the public or media who are watching this live feed of the meeting. Before I commence with the formal business on the agenda, I'd like to cover some of the housekeeping issues for us all to follow. All participants must mute their microphone. To speak, please use the chat function on the right-hand side. If you type RTS, which stands for Request to Speak. Remember, everyone in the meeting can see the messages in the chat function. When invited to speak by the chair, please remember to unmute your microphone. And once invited to speak, please introduce yourself with your name and position, unless you've already introduced yourself earlier in the meeting. If you have any issues with connectivity, try switching off your video and use just the telephone function. And if connectivity issues continue, you may have to leave the meeting and rejoin to get a better signal. If my connection is lost, my Vice Chair, Councillor Alison Beattie, will take over until my connection is restored. And on this occasion, if I could remind members that this meeting is being held in the pre-election period, and therefore members will be required to conduct themselves in accordance with the pre-election guidance issued to all members by Helen Lynch, the Head of Legal and Democratic Services, in her capacity as Monitoring Officer. Okay, we'll go straight into the agenda, which starts at item 1, apologies for absence. Have we received any apologies, Jackie?
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies today from Councillors Hopgood, Madison, Makepeace, Savoury, Tinsley and Willis.
Okay, thank you. And at item 2, do we have any substitute members?
We don't have any substitutes today, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Item 3 is the minutes of the meetings held on the 22nd of January and the 11th of February 2021. They're on pages 3 to 17 of your agenda packs. Can we agree those minutes as a correct record, please? Okay, I've had no dissent. Are there any matters arising? Andy, do you want to take us through some of the points arising from the meeting of those two minutes of those two meetings, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The minutes for the meeting on the 22nd of January, the points raised at the meeting were circulated to members on the 2nd of February. There's an item on page 7 relating to workplace transformation, enabling smarter working. Councillor Madison had raised a question about being able to contact officers. Councillor Madison has been contacted by the ICT service at one of Vicky Murray's team, contacted Councillor Madison to discuss that with her. On page 9, item 6, the poverty issues. Members will be aware I actually brought that report to the committee in my previous role. There are a number of matters arising from that report, one of which was raised by Councillor Bell. That was an issue of free school meals. Councillor Bell's had a response on that. It was to do with the funding formula, and it's been confirmed that the funding formula for free school meals is wrapped up in the broader funding formula for schools. Also, Councillor Hopgood raised questions about the grants to business, and in particular those small businesses who did not have access to premises related grants. A response has been sent on that as well. I think it's just worth noting that the Council's Revenues and Benefits team do provide small grants to local businesses, and all of the information for that is on the Council's website. And also, in addition to that, there is support available through what is called the additional restrictions grant ARG, where the council does have a small amount of discretion to support small businesses. So I would urge members to be aware of that. On the meeting of the 11th of February, so comments from the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Management Board set out on page 16 are included in the MTFP capital and revenue budgets, and they're on the agenda today, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Andy. That takes us to item 4. Do we have any declarations of interest from members? I take it that we have none. We'll go straight to item 5, which is Q3 performance, the report of the Interim Corporate Director of Resources. We've got Tom Gorman to present the report, and Alison Lazazera is available to respond to any HR issues raised. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Tom Gorman. I'm the Corporate Scrutiny and Strategy Manager. This is the regular performance monitoring report that this board receives on a quarterly basis to help inform its work programme and in respect of the corporate agenda, but also to help members of the individual overview and scrutiny committees identify areas for further investigation. This is a bit different this time due to the amended timetable for meetings due to COVID. Meetings were cancelled and rescheduled. It's meant the majority of thematic scrutiny committees have already considered their portion of the content of this report already. So some members will see some familiar content and some familiar messages coming through from this report. So it's just to let you know that it's done kind of the other way around this time. The report covers Q3 period for the current year, taking us up to 31st of December, and I've just got some highlights against the corporate ambitions and objectives as set out in our council plan, which was agreed by council October last year. Looking at the first ambition, which is more and better jobs, the majority of this ambition falls under the remit of economy and enterprise, as members will be aware. The economy and regeneration continue to be affected by the coronavirus pandemic, which features right the way through this report, but also the UK's exit from the European Union. So just looking at some of the state of the county or state of the nation type indicators to start with, the report states that the UK economy fell by 8.6% in comparison with last year's figure. That's a fall in GDP. That was the September figure. I can give you a quick update on that. It's published a quarter in arrears, so we actually have the Q4 figure, which is a contraction of 7.3% now. So it has gone up very slightly, but we're still down on the previous year. One of the things that I've noticed, and yourselves might have noticed through sort of national media reporting, is a number of economists and the likes of, Robert Peston on the national news and this sort of thing, are kind of confident that we can bounce back from this contraction. And the main reason for that is gross savings are actually up by 109% from Q4 of 2019. So what economists are hoping as lockdown eases some of that the savings, the people who haven't had the opportunity to spend all of their hard-earned money will be released into the economy, and that will boost matters somewhat. So what economists are describing the recession as is a V-shaped recession. It went down sharply. In fact, it was the biggest contraction in history since sort of figures began in the 18th century, but it came substantially back up, but we're still about 7.3% behind, as I've said. In contrast, there's some research which we've published a link to in the report, which is the potential impact of Brexit, which is emerging slowly. Forecasts the effects of that will be longer term and maybe have a more adverse effect than COVID long term. That's a forecast, obviously, so we'll have to keep an eye on that one. But we just thought we'd publish that just for members to have a look at. The employment rate remains static in the county, in line with regional and national trends. It's 71.9%. It was 72.1% last quarter, so it has gone down very slightly, but it's kind of more or less static. And that's largely due to the government support packages that they've put in. 1 in 9 employees within the county remain on the coronavirus job retention or furlough scheme, as it's often described, and almost 6 in 10 of self-employed people are on the self-employment income support scheme, which is the sort of self-employed equivalent of the furlough scheme. And once these support schemes are terminated eventually, I think we can expect to see a deterioration in the employment rate. Number of universal credit claimants has leveled off after a large surge which was experienced at the beginning of the pandemic, and the unemployment rate in the county has risen on last year, and there's been a steep rise in redundancies. You can see in the report, although we only have national figures for this, so I can't give you a categorical figure for the county. Obviously, there'll be some increase in poverty through job loss and reductions in income and increased expenditure incurred by families during the pandemic, and that remains a concern. There's been a large increase in the number of children eligible for free school meals, which is a key measure for child poverty. And I think when child poverty measures started, we used to quote 1 in 5 families, 1 in 5 children, sorry, are in poverty, but it's now kind of 1 in 4, so that has increased. What the council have done about that, there's £2 million that we've invested in holiday food provision programmes across the county, and the COVID winter grant scheme, which the government introduced, now renamed and extended as the COVID local support grant scheme, has been put in place to support vulnerable families through the provision of supermarket food vouchers. Continue to offer businesses support through our own schemes, some of which Andy has just kind of outlined there, or as a conduit for government support and advice, and we offer advice and signposting to other sources of support throughout the county. Issues of more and better jobs ambition, which fall under the remit of the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee, relate to the provision of good quality education and training. So some of the aspects of this are related to the Children's Overview Committee. Due to COVID, GCSE results, as you'll all be aware, I'm sure, were determined through centre assessment grading rather than examinations. So last year's results were obtained through that method. Our results in Durham compare favourably on a regional basis, but are below national outcomes. And we can't compare those to previous years, obviously, because it's a different methodology for assessing the grades. Similarly, A-level results were by assessment rather than examination. And again, they can't be compared to previous grades, but we are in line in A-level terms with national grades, and we're higher than the regional sort of averages as well. So good position there on A-levels. However, it does remain to be seen what the long-term impacts of COVID-19 have been on the future of young people, and we had a bit of a discussion last week in the Children's Committee around that. Moving on to the long and independent lives ambition, which broadly falls under the remit of the Adults Wellbeing and Health Committee. People are living longer than ever due to improved healthcare, working conditions, improved safety in our homes and on our roads, that kind of thing as well, I suppose, contributes to that. We're living on average 3 years longer than we were 20 years ago. However, these are pre-COVID rates, and the rise in life expectancy, I think, we'll probably see that has been arrested somewhat due to the excess deaths experienced during the pandemic. In contrast with life expectancy, there's a different picture, a more gloomier picture on healthy life expectancy, which is the number of years that people are expected to remain in good health. There's been a slow increase for men throughout the county, though not at the same rate as overall life expectancy, but the rate for women is actually decreasing and the gap is widening. So there's something weird there happening in relation to women. Smoking prevalence is at 17%. It's a considerable decrease over the last 10 years, but still significantly higher than the Director of Public Health's ambition target of 5% to achieve. Expectant mothers with a tobacco dependency, smoking at the time of delivery is reducing and is achieving or overachieving the target, although it's still higher than the national figure. And breastfeeding in new mothers is slowly increasing, although it's still significantly below both the regional and national figures. One of the big concerns during the pandemic, which has been discussed, I think, in adults and in children's committee, is the effect on people's mental health for a whole raft of reasons: loss of employment, reductions in income, anxiety through uncertainty about the future, anxiety about contracting the virus, deterioration in physical health through contracting the virus, leading to a deterioration in mental health too, social isolation due to lockdown, maybe bereavement as well, people that experienced their deaths of friends and family. And that's led to an increased demand for both primary and secondary mental health services, so that's a big increase. The vaccination programme within the county has been very successful in the northeast in particular, I think, compared to other regions. The focus for us is on care homes, and 90% of our residents and 81% of our care home workers have had the first COVID vaccination in care homes for older people. And that's a lot better, I think, than some of the figures reported on the news for the likes of the London boroughs, which is, some of them are down to sort of 50%. That 90% for residents and 80% for care home workers is the minimum level for sort of protection of COVID-19, our public health colleagues tell us. So we're achieving that sort of vaccination protection in our care homes overall. Moving on to our third ambition, connected communities. Overall crime levels are down, although there has been a continued rise, I think, in hate crime, and antisocial behaviour is also up. The antisocial behaviour largely relates to COVID-19 regulation infringements, large gatherings and that sort of thing. That the penalties issued under that are categorised as antisocial behaviour, so that explains that increase. Domestic violence incidents back to previous levels following a decrease, and I think the decrease was actually concerning because we felt that it may be hidden. So the fact that it's going up has been interpreted by the people who work in this field as kind of a good thing in a way, if sort of the fact that these crimes are being recorded and are being dealt with. Placement pressures around children looked after in our children's social care remain high, and referrals into social care have decreased. We think that's largely due to the schools being closed during lockdown being a key factor. A lot of referrals into children's social care come through schools, but caseloads for our social workers still remain high. We have environmentally, we have good environmental cleanliness levels, although fly tipping incidents are on the increase. There's been a significant increase in household waste collected. That's both recycling and residual waste since lockdown, and that reflects the national picture. That's something we're experiencing nationally, and this has led actually to a decrease in the proportion of waste recycled. So the whole lot's gone up, but the proportion that recycling represents is a smaller proportion. And also it's led to an increase in waste going to landfill, as the big increases of waste collected overall have kind of overwhelmed our system. We've had to landfill some of it more than in previous quarters. There's been a large reduction in carbon emissions. But we think a lot of that is a large proportion of that is due to lockdown, people staying at home, less traffic on the roads, and also some businesses ceasing operations. So it's some of that is unlikely to remain sustainable in the long term. There's been no churn in our housing market, so households in need of rehousing are having to spend more time in temporary accommodation. That's one of the indicators that we use. And empty homes brought back into use is down, and that's largely down to COVID restrictions on construction work in the past, we've been told by our housing colleagues. Backlog maintenance on our roads is now in line with other local authorities, and the priority for the coming year, which was reported to us in the Environment Scrutiny Committee, will be on unclassified roads, where we have the largest percentage which are in need of repair. Moving on to our final ambition, which is around the excellent council, our sort of corporate health type indicators. Many of our employees obviously continue to work at home in order to control transmission of the virus, and what that has led to is a fall in sickness rates. People remaining at home and lockdown is obviously reduced spread of coronavirus, but has reduced spread of lots of other sort of coughs and sneezes and things like that. So we have falling sickness rates. It's 9.7 days per employee on average from 10.6 days last year. 7 out of 10 of our employees have had no sick in the last year, and 4 out of 5 have had less than 5 days sickness. Some of the things that we're doing to contribute to that are we're offering flu vaccinations and also COVID-19 vaccinations to those who are eligible. The top 3 categories of sickness, which account for about 70% of our sickness, over a third of it is mental health related, and that continues and has for the last few years to be our biggest sickness reason, if you like. 1/4 is musculoskeletal, and 1/10 relates to infections. And it's interesting that if you look at the infections, the non-COVID infections are down 2,500 days across the quarter. COVID-19 infection is up 718 days. So there's obviously a big difference there, and that accounts for some of that decrease in sickness that we're experiencing in our staff. Just sort of caution on that is there's been some national research to indicate that there will be an expected surge in infection as people return to the workplace, because they haven't been obviously catching infections off each other in the workplace. So that's some national research that reports that may not be sustainable in the future. In terms of our resources, and the next report is on finance, so there might be some more detail on this, but overall there's been a £70 million additional budget pressure on the council due to COVID, and that's increased expenditure due to COVID and loss of income. As you know, sports centres and the likes are closed, so there's less opportunity for income generation there. We've received COVID support grant from the government, but there's still a shortfall of about 15 million when we take that grant funding into account. So as mentioned, Chair, this report's a little out of sync with the normal sequence of events that we normally follow, where the board considers the report first and then it goes to the individual thematic committees. 4 of our scrutiny committees have already debated this report in some detail. So what we're doing is just asking members to consider the overall performance, position and direction of travel, the impact of COVID-19, which I think has affected all of our performance areas, and the actions being taken to try and address areas of underperformance. And with that, Chair, I'll just open it up for questions if there's any.
Thanks for that, Tom. And you're right about the level of education for some members, because of the exceptional safety stronger. These factors have been to each of the thematic committees. There's a lot of positives in there as well. I know each of the scrutiny committees have been taking regular reports on the council's response to COVID-19, and I think that the work of the council and its partners has fed through to some of the positive data that you've covered in your report, Tom. Having said that, there are at least two deeply worrying things from my perspective. First one is about the economic recovery. I would hope that the economists are right and that there will be a the recovery. I'm concerned about how even that recovery is going to be, because undoubtedly there will be people with money to spend. It'll be interesting to see what our household disposable income figures are like over the next 2 quarters. But I've got concerns about people who are struggling to put food on the table, how they've had to respond to the pressures of COVID-19 and how they come through it as well. So there's something to watch there. And I suppose the most deeply worrying one for me is the impact. Well, I don't know what the impact is. It's the outcome really on healthy life expectancy for women. It's a curious one. I don't really know what's going on there, where we see things going in the right direction for life expectancy for males and females. Healthy life expectancy is going in the right direction for men, but not for women. So I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if there's been certain services within the NHS being affected. It may be something that we choose to keep a closer eye on through one of the thematic committees. But from my perspective, they're just 2 of the issues that have me a little bit concerned from some of the data we've heard this morning. I've got 3 people wishing to speak up to now. Mark Wilkes is first. Mark.
Good morning, Chair. And like you, I've got the same concerns in relation to health, and I hope that we try and fast track some of the work that's going to be done. For example, in relation to our leisure centres, that we can maybe get some of that work done much more quickly. So there is more to do. Because it is a serious concern, particularly in relation to the fact as to how many people have been tied up at home over the last year and a half. I'd like to just mention, first of all, it's quite a long report this, but page 71, reference 104, and it's something that the officer mentioned in relation to empty homes. I just want to challenge that statement, that the reason why the data on bringing empty homes back into use is poor is because of COVID. I actually believe that it's not just because of COVID. I believe it's because we scrapped the staff without even telling us. Because if you look at the data, it goes back for the previous year as well. I've raised it at previous meetings. I think when you've got over 6,000 empty properties in the county and we're only bringing 35 back into use in a quarter, it's dreadful. And we really need to re-emphasise and get those people that we were promised back into those jobs that were deleted without any of our councillor permissions. And I expect to see that improve off the back of doubling that staff again that were taken away from us. The issue I'd actually like to look at is the highways related issue, because over the last few months, it's probably the 2nd highest number of complaints that I've been getting through as a councillor. The worst is actually just in the last 2 weeks in relation to telegraph poles going up, which I'm sure other people will also be getting complaints about. It's gone absolutely ballistic in the last week. I've never had so much casework about one issue ever in 12 years as a councillor. But in relation to road maintenance, the council obviously put some additional funding in the budget a few months ago. We've seen extremely cold weather, and we know that everybody knows that the roads have deteriorated significantly over this winter. We now got 50% more of our A roads in a poor condition compared to the northeast average, and our unclassified roads, and I know that we've been told that there's an emphasis on this by the highways team, that we're now seeing that over 1/5 of all of our unclassified roads are in need of maintenance. And these tend to be estate roads, and also particularly in our rural areas, a lot of our rural roads. And compared to the national figure, it's 25 to 30% worse. Having had such a bad winter, and with us having had possibly a worse winter than other parts of the country as well, because of just where we are, I can see this being even worse when these figures come through. And I'm not convinced that Cabinet has put enough money in this year to deal with things. I don't think the government ever gives us enough money. But my concern is that when we realise just how bad this situation is over the next few months, as more and more surveys are done, if we don't put extra money in now and start to book work in, a lot of the types of work that need to be done with repairs, proper surfacing works, can only be done in that 6-month period from around now through to September, October. And if we don't put some money in immediately, we can't book it in and get the work done. And by the time we get to next winter, we're going to find things in an even worse state. And I really think as Scrutiny, we should be urging Cabinet to look at bringing additional funding in year now, because if we wait several months till the next Scrutiny meeting and see the figures, it may well be too late to actually book work in. So that would be the one key thing, looking at that figure, that I think we should be pressing on Cabinet to be looking at now before we get to the end of this council term. That would be my comments, Chair, today.
Thanks for that, Mark. I'm sure those comments, certainly the last ones in relation to highways, will be taken up either by the Environment or the Economy committees as part of their future work programmes. Tom, Alison, I don't know if you have any comments on Mark's other issues.
Just on the first one, on the empty homes, Councillor Wilkes has raised this issue in a previous committee, and we did seek a detailed explanation from the service. I don't know if that was circulated actually, so can certainly share that with Councillor Wilkes and other members of the board if that would be useful. In terms of the highways issues, yeah, we had highways service report to our Environment Committee recently, and the frustrating thing for me, I guess, and Councillor Wilkes has touched on this, is we're sort of looking at figures from, well, 2019 in this case, and you know, by the time you play catch up, where will we be? But we were assured by the highways service that, as I say, and when I presented the report, that the big priority will be on unclassified roads going forward for the rest of the year. And I don't know if Councillor Adam and Councillor Milburn were obviously there. That was the message that we received when we received that report.
Thanks for that, Tom. And yes, I believe it has been raised, Mark's previous issue. So if that response could be circulated to members, I'm sure we'd all appreciate it. David Boyce.
Thank you, Chair. David Boyce, member for Easington and Chair of Safer Stronger Communities. I've just got a couple of issues, quick issues, if I may, Chair. The first one might shed some light on why women's legs are dying a little bit sooner, and that was a report we got to Safer Stronger a couple of years ago, where there's been a massive increase in the number of women present to hospital with drink-related problems. I think it's something ridiculous, like something 76-77% of 35 to 55-year-olds. And I think a lot of that is because of the amount of wine that's being drunk in the house and this ladder culture. And that's not trying to just scapegoat women, because I think there's a lot of men presenting to hospital with the same sort of things as well. So that might be a bit of an indicator of what's going on. The other issues I want to bring up is, again, related to crime, and I'm not quite as optimistic as Tom's report seemed to be suggesting with regards to crime being level and antisocial being up just slightly. If it's not just it can't possibly just be my area, but we seem to be witnessing a bit of a crime epidemic at the moment, and a lot of that's to do with the warm weather coming, kids having lighters, setting places alight. We've had tremendous problems with down at our nature reserve, where kids, just for the fun of it, are going setting things alight. We've got a lot of nesting going on, and those poor animals and birds are being like sort of destroyed just because of wanton violence. And I know this is happening in other areas, because I've seen it on the news and I've seen it on Facebook and stuff. So I don't know what the issue is. I don't know why they want to do this. I don't know why people want to destroy the beautiful nature that we've got about us, but it's obviously going on. The other thing is this continuing thing with off-road bikes. You know, we've got off-road bikes, young lads going on. I challenged my local beat sergeant about what we can do about it, and he's basically said there's not much they can do about it, because they're being given directions not to chase after these young lads on bikes. So unless they can actually catch them on the act before they get on the road and get speeding, there's not a great deal they can do. He said they're desperate to do something and they're looking for government guidance. So I don't know what we can do as a Scrutiny Committee to put pressure on our Cabinet, to put pressure on the government, but there's a lot of communities absolutely crying out for some help here, because It's not all young people, and again, I don't want to castigate and scapegoat all young people, but we do have a hardcore of young people who are basically sticking two fingers up at us. They know they can get away with it. They know how far they can push, and they are seem to be getting away with it. The other last thing I would just like to mention is how we are recording crime. And again, this is an issue I've been bringing up to various committees that I've been sitting on. But you know, how do we record the crime, Tom? Is it reported crime to the police, or is it crime that's gone through the court system, or there's been guilt admitted to? Because different authorities and different police organisations are reporting in different ways. And I had a word with Steve White, the interim police and crime commissioner, and he's equally as frustrated that we're not like sort of recording the same things across the board, which makes it very difficult for somebody like Tom Gorman to try and come up with a performance report when we're not like measuring like we're like. So I don't know if we need to have a review across the board of how we do the reporting, what gets reported to us, because we had a report saying that child reoffending was 51%, and then the next week it had gone down to 39%, which was more in line with the regional and the national averages. So we need more confidence in what's reported to us, whether it's across the board, whether it's harmonised across all different authorities, all different police services, because otherwise we're not going to have confidence in what we've been presented. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think you're right, David. It may be something that the Safer Stronger Committee want to have a look at, the consistency of reporting, because it is clearly an issue. As far as antisocial behaviour and crime goes, I think COVID-19 certainly had an impact where people have had more spare time. You know, they say the devil makes work for idle hands, and I think that's certainly been a factor. That will come out in the months and the weeks after COVID-19, but I think reporting is an issue, because if we know that crime and antisocial behaviour are issues in our community, I think we're not even scratching the surface, because a lot of crime and antisocial behaviour doesn't go reported at all. So if it's not recorded, how do we have an accurate figure of what's actually happening in our communities? So it may be something that Safer Stronger has a look at through its work programme. Tom, do you have any comments to make on the other issues David raised?
Yeah, I've recorded 4 sort of issues, just go through them one by one. So the women reporting to hospital admissions due to alcohol-related conditions. We can get figures on that, so it might be useful to share those with the board, particularly Chair and Vice Chair of Health and yourselves, just to, that might be an issue that you want to look at in the future, so we can do that. In terms of the primary and secondary fires, yes, I agree there's an issue in County Durham, there's an issue across the whole of the North East. We had the Chief Fire Officer reporting on sort of fire strategy in general. I think it was a report largely in connection with the sort of bonfire night season, but he did present figures that the three of the 4 sort of fire authorities in the Northeast were the highest in the country for primary and secondary fires. They kind of swapped around a bit when you went to secondary fires, and but 3 of the 4, Tyne, Weir, Cleveland and County Durham, were certainly up there and significantly higher than the rest of the country as well. So it is an issue, fires, and it is something that we've looked at in the past, but maybe that's something we could look at in the future, just revisit that work that we did around deliberate fires that we did through Safer and Stronger Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. The off-road bikes, it was brought up at the last Safer and Stronger Committee, and it's something that we're looking towards bringing a piece of work to the committee for some review activity, and that'll be multi-agency. There's obviously things that the council can do, and there's things that the police can do as well. In terms of how crime is recorded, it should with fingers crossed be standard across the country. You have national crime recording standards and Home Office counting rules that all police forces are supposed to follow, and they're audited regularly on that and inspected, and they get scored and all of the rest of it. It's actually crime that's recorded, not that goes through the court. So if you have some sort of pre-reprimand disposal system like the checkpoint system, for instance, in Durham, the person has to admit guilt for that crime, if you like, before we can take them through checkpoints, so it gets recorded as a crime, despite the fact that we're not taking them through the magistrate's court, as a for instance. So it should be all recorded crime by the police. Obviously, there's an election coming up, and we'll have an influx of new members following that election. It might be useful to get someone from the police to come in and do a little kind of teaching, if you like, a little training session for members around how crime is recorded and what they're looking at, really. And I think that's it. Yeah, those are the issues that are recorded.
Thanks, Tom. I think they're valuable suggestions, and I think if we're looking at women's health through Adults Wellbeing and Health Committee, I think it's worth noting that while life expectancy is a concern, it's healthy life expectancy that's going in the wrong direction, and that's a key issue for me, because we were getting to a point where people in the late 50s, are coming to the end of the healthy life expectancy, and for women it's going in the wrong direction, and that's it's a real concern, because ultimately further down the line I think that'll hit life expectancy figures. But I think for the time being it will appear to pair those two separate elements apart between life expectancy and healthy life expectancy. Richard Bell.
Thanks, Chair. Richard Bell, Barnard Castle West. I think overall my observation is that it's hard for this committee to see where the challenges are because of COVID until that COVID fog clears. You've mentioned the point about the uneven recovery, can testify to that. I think I said last year, try and get anybody in the building or decorating trade, anything to do with home improvements, no chance, rushed off the feet. I'm sure other areas, hospitality, etc., we're going to see big problems when the furlough scheme ends. So I think there will be a patchy recovery. Share Councillor Boyce's concerns about reported crime, and I think particular antisocial behaviour, the vast majority of it goes unreported because people feel there's no point. Is there some soft data that we can get from our neighbourhood wardens just to give us a handle on where it's an issue? I've got a lot more people complaining about pubs nowadays. Is that COVID breaches? Is that genuine antisocial behaviour? Is that because they've got used to so many months with pubs being closed, a nice quiet, neighbour? I don't know. There's a whole things that are going to take quite a while to settle down. Councillor Wilkes mentioned highways. I've got a lot more people reporting footpath defects to me. I've talked to the public rights away people and they say, yeah, we've never had as many reported problems, but that's because a lot more people are walking and getting out there and using footpaths that previously weren't used. So to me, it's very difficult to discern what the true challenges are going to be going forward. All we can say is that COVID's thrown up a lot of different and unusual behaviour. You mentioned also reporting of incidences, lagging that. It's going to take a while for this sort of fog to clear to see what the true challenges are. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Richard, because performance management really is about detecting trends, isn't it? And what we've got in front of us this morning is a snapshot at Q3, which is takes us right to the cusp of the third lockdown. So it's really trying to get through this information, this data that's presented, and say how it fits in with the trend. So sometimes you can be alarmed by figures that show up. When you look at the data tables, you can see there's a lot of red when you compare the data to what it was 12 months ago, which would have been the third quarter of 2019, of course. So it can be a little bit misleading, can't it? So we'll have to wait and see how that pans out in the months and the years after the pandemic, or the restrictions associated with pandemic are lifted. But yes, it is a concern. I don't know if there's any need for a response, Richard. I took them mainly as comments rather than questions. Is that correct? Okay, thanks. Craig Martin.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted something that I've looked at the data that to follow up on what Councillor Wilkes and Councillor Bell have said regarding highways. They kind of just where you can see clearly from page 91 that the council is spending money on highways, that the maintenance backlog it is reducing from reference 114. But what concerns me is that we're seeing the percentage of roads with where maintenance is recommended, that they're going up rather than going down. So I think it's something else that the highways sort of scrutiny committee need to have a look at, is how is this money being spent? Because if it is being spent by the looks of the data, but it doesn't seem to be having noticeable, tangible, measurable, better effects from the neighbourhoods we live in. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Craig. It has been raised by the relevant scrutiny committee. I think there's actually two of them, the environment and the economy. And as I remember it sits within the work programme as well. And the point that Richard raised about pavements, that seems to have been a forgotten cousin for the last few years, where we have focused on roads, where pavements are a genuine concern. I know that definitely was raised at the relevant scrutiny committee, and that is being addressed, but yeah, it's certainly something we can consider in the future work programme. Alan Shield.
Thanks, Chair. Just to echo some of the comments from some of the other councillors with regards to engagement with the police, and I would like to determine what sort of engagement the police have with our environmental control department. We've had a number of issues with commercial burning of waste, or burning of commercial waste, as I should say, which has been previously reported, and CPNs have been issued. Unfortunately, nobody seems to get the answer these days, and it's restarted. And the problem is that when it's been reported by the residents, the police have said, well, it's nothing to do with us now. Well, how could it be something to do with the police previously? And when it's restarted, it's nothing to do with the police now. I sometimes believe it's down to the interpretation of the call handler that gets the information, and then he or she decides whether it is a police matter or not. So I think that needs to be clarified specifically, and Tom's suggestion about for new members, but not just new members, I think existing members need to have that clarified. But also, how does the link between the police enforcement and environmental control be better established to ensure that the report goes to the correct department first? And if we're working as a team, let's cooperate as a team, that everybody is pulling the same way. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Alan. I think that process might be worth further consideration, you know, the interaction between environmental health or whichever organisation it is and the police. I think commercial waste burning itself might have been one of the factors that have come out of COVID-19, because it shows in the figures that the waste disposal facilities have been affected by COVID-19. So it may have been one of the issues, the unintended consequences of what's being forced on us by the response to COVID-19. But that actual interaction between how it's reported and how it's dealt with may benefit from a closer inspection. Tom, have you got any comments on that?
I was just going to say exactly what you said, Chair, on burning of waste, because of the situation that we're in with regard to the increased waste and maybe not being able to get rid of it by a sort of more legitimate means, I guess. But the other agency that was thrown into the mix there, Councillor Shield mentioned the police and our own environmental health people, the Environment Agency as well, who have an enforcement role in this situation as well. So I might get some clarification from our environmental health people of where individual agencies' powers start and end, really, just for members' benefit.
Thanks, Tom. That would help. The last member I have indicated wish to speak is Councillor Eddie Adam, which is probably well timed because his committee is being mentioned in virtually every query that's been raised this morning. Eddie?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. That's exactly why I waited to the end to see what members were going to say, because I knew it would be an issue that members were really concerned about. It's really just to give assurances to the members of the committee that the overview and scrutiny for the environment will be looking at this through the work programme. It's an area that we look at every year, and we have similar questions every year. However, what I would say is that the data that we are relying on is well behind the times. And obviously the information that's coming forward from members is anecdotal at this particular moment in time. So to be thinking about throwing money at something that is purely anecdotal is probably the wrong way to go about it. Although I do understand there are concerns about the highways and footpaths and roads, etc. I've seen it for myself. There clearly has been a deterioration over the winter period, but again, that has been caused by the low temperatures, extremely low temperatures over a long period of time. That's had a major impact. And I know the highway maintenance team is trying to get through that backlog, and they've done a fantastic job, bearing in mind the miles of roads that we actually have in the county and that we've actually got to manage. So there has been a huge effort to try and rectify it, but I think we need the real data before we can actually do any real work on that. So, you know, it will be coming to the overview and scrutiny committee, and I'm sure we will look at that in some detail, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. Tom?
Yes, it was just on that up-to-date data that when we had the highways people at the Environment Committee, they did report on an innovative scheme that they're taking part in, which is funded by the government, and it has IT people and university people and all sorts working on this, and we're doing it in conjunction with an authority in Wales, I seem to remember, and it's kits that we can affix to the bottom of our vehicles, for instance a bin wagon, travelling all around the county, up and down back streets and estates and all of the rest of it, and it scans the roads. It uses cameras and laser technology and all of the rest of it, and gives an up-to-date database of where the faults lie on our highways. So it may be that if we keep an eye on that scheme and how it's progressing, that we'll have more up-to-date data from that system. It was just to let members know that, because obviously not all members on the Environment Committee, that was just reported to us through our Highway Services team.
Right, thanks Tom. I have nobody else wishing to speak, so that was item 5. We have the recommendation on page 25. It's quite lengthy, so I don't propose to read it out. So can we accept that recommendation, please? Please show any dissent in the chat function.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. That takes us to item 6, which is the Q3 budget report of the interim corporate director of resources, and we have Ian Herbison here this morning to take us through the report. Over to you, Ian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Ian Herbison, Finance Manager for Resources and Regeneration. The report in front of you this morning is the Resources Q3 performance to December, and revenue is showing a forecast underspend of 963,000 against a revised budget of 27.205 million. So that's a slight increase from Q2 and an improved position. Capital, we've now got a revised budget of 3.6 million, and spend to December was 2.4 million. And the profile or expected budget at that point, which we should have spent, was 2.9 million. So actual spend was below expected levels at Q3. As touched on in the previous report, COVID and the impact of the pandemic continues to have an impact, and it does so in resources. So what we've excluded from the cash limit outturn position is some COVID overspends of expenditure and lost income. That counts to 4.5 million, but that's been offset in some ways by savings across the service areas of 0.789 million. And the reason they've been excluded from the outturn is that they're being funded corporately from the government grant money that we've received. However, as Tom pointed out in the last report, that's actually not enough to cover the total of our additional expenditure across all services. But there is more detail on the corporate treatment that can be found in the Cabinet report, which is in the papers that are linked, and that went on the 17th of March 2021, and the report was called the Forecast of Revenue Outturn period to the 31st of December. The tables under paragraph 10 provide a more detailed breakdown of the cash limit position by individual expenditure type, but also by each individual head of service. And the table in paragraph 11 provides some detailed commentary on the variances against the revised budget, again by individual heads of service. Because COVID's having an impact, as we can see across the budgets, as is in line with all the other scrutiny panels, the detail can be found in paragraphs 14 and 15 of the more significant COVID pressures and related savings in relation to the Resources Directorate. And for scrutiny panel members, the capital expenditure that I referred to above, there's a detailed appendix 2, which shows the individual schemes and the spend against budget for those. So that's all I really wanted to say, Chair, but I'm happy to take any questions from members should there be any. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. Do any members have any comments or questions for Ian? I have nobody indicating that they wish to speak, so can we accept the recommendation, please? You take that as consent. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Chair.
Item 7 is the notice of key decisions, the report of the head of Legal and Democratic Services. Andy, this one's for you, I think.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I should have introduced myself properly at the previous item. I'm Andy Palmer, Head of Transformation. I'm stepping in for Jenny Howarth, who, as I'm sure everybody knows, is retiring this month. There's only one new item, Chair, on the forward plan. That is the proposal to amalgamate Ox Close Primary School and Ox Close Nursery School into one primary school and replace in a replacement new build on the Durham Road site at the former Tudor Grange Comprehensive School, and that's from September 2024. So that's the only new item which is on the forward plan, and so that report is just for members' information and to note our statutory publications of the forward plan.
Thanks, Andy. As you say, it's for information. So are you happy to accept the recommendation? We take that as consent. Thank you. That takes us to item 8, which is the refresh of the work programme 2021-2022. And back to you, Andy, for this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, what members will note, so this is the refresh of the forward plan. For the committee, members will note that the majority of items on the forward plan are items of professional and technical reports, which basically relate to good governance of the council and are standing items for the committee. There are also a number of reports there which are historical reports which have remained on the forward plan. So a good example of historical reports is members will note there's a number of reports relating to the council's transformation programme. Members were going to go on a visit to some of our newly refurbished premises as part of the Smarter Working programme. Obviously, because of COVID, that has been delayed, so that remains on the work programme. And we have a series of reports coming. So there was the regulation and investigatory powers. That's the quarterly report by usually brought in by Camilla Coulson Patel from Democratic Services. We have the customer feedback report, which is a regular report to the committee. We have the annual budget reports, the quarterly budget reports, which come to the committee. Notice of key decisions. The quarterly performance report, which we've just had this morning, remains on the forward plan, of course, as well as periodic updates, including things like the implications of government policy, welfare reform, poverty reports, etc. So that's populating the forward plan going forward for the management board, and obviously there will be an opportunity to refresh the forward plan following the elections in May. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andy. It might seem a little bit curious to bring an item on the forward plan, the future work programme, to the last scrutiny management board meeting of this council, but I think it helps in terms of continuity to put something in front of the new committee, which will meet after the elections in May. So it's an opportunity for members to put down a marker, some issues that they might wish to discuss. It'll be put in front of the new management board when it meets in June for further consideration. So now's the opportunity. Mark Wilkes.
Thank you, Chair. And the words you just said then is exactly what I wanted to hear. Because whilst I know we have our own workload as management board, we also oversee what's going on all the other committees as well. And I am rather surprised that whilst there's some excellent work proposed in the council plan in relation to care homes, and particularly into us reviewing the approach for commissioning to work out what's potentially going to be the best way to move forward in terms of financing for care homes. I still don't see anything anywhere for any committee or the council to be reviewing what's happened over the last 12 months relating to COVID. And when you look at the Durham Insight dashboard now, which shows 575 people have died in our care homes, which is at least 11% of our number of care home residents, and is probably significantly higher actually than that. I really don't understand why, as an authority, we haven't initiated a review of this and why Scrutiny is not leading on doing this. I think it's a critical issue. We think that we hope that we're all through this pandemic situation, but we don't know what's going to come down the line. And I really don't understand why, as an authority, we're not laying down a marker now to say that we need to look at what's gone on and investigate, so that we can learn from the mistakes, if there were any, during the pandemic, and particularly in care homes, which seems to have been the key letdown, in my view, in the county, with over a third of the people who've died from COVID actually being in care homes. I just don't understand why we haven't initiated this review yet. Thank you, Chair.
Those comments will be noted, Mark, and I think right towards the end you were saying that you think, or we hope that we're through this. I think that's a critical point to make. We don't know whether we're through it or not, and I think the right time and the right place for any review would be at a national level, and that seems to be the general consensus I've picked up, that when the government does decide to hold a review into COVID-19 and specifically what's happened in care homes, then this council will take part in that review. I believe that's been the general consensus as far as I'm concerned. So we'll wait and see what happens. But those comments have been noted anyway, Mark. Richard Bell.
Thanks, Chair. Just really to continue from my earlier comments, I think even COVID aside, and if you look at the sheer amount of uncertainty and harken back to the budget briefings with Jeff Garfoot, you know, in terms of funding settlements being annual, the long-term fair funding review, what's happened to that, public health funding, what's happening to that. Never known so much uncertainty, really, and I'm sure that whatever political party and none we come from, we all have people who will be joining the council who want to change the world, and after you've been on it a while, you feel you're doing well if you get a footpath fixed in your division. Never mind change the world. But I kind of feel that in the new council, there maybe needs to be, as part of the training and the briefing, not just about the roles of the committees, but somehow just to educate people really about the big uncertainties that are out there, because we've sat in these meetings for years after years hearing about, you know, uncertainties about policy, adult social care, you name it, reviews that are supposed to be happening. And I think it's very difficult for someone without those years of background to actually be able to grasp what the focus of the work of the committee should be. So I'll just throw that into the mix as an idea for perhaps something to do with the new councillors. Thanks, Chair.
I think that's a very good point, Richard, and for the purposes of this committee, I think one of the main issues is going to be future funding. If you look at the corporate risk heat map that was at the end of the performance management report, there's one of the corners right at the top right hand side that you don't really want to see lit up red, where it's critical and highly probable, and that is future funding for local authorities. So I think it's something that we need to have a close look at as a committee in the work programme. I know we've been following most of this through the regular reports we have on the MTFP, but I think it's something worth considering. And I think it's a valid point that you raised, that we do need to have training that fits in with each of the thematic committees. So that comment's been noted, Richard. Mark, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, Chair. I fully appreciate your comment that there's going to be some national reviews in relation to COVID and care homes, but I just think from our point of view in our county, when we have the worst death rate in the entire country, and when the trust that covers our area in Darlington has the 2 worst death rates in the entire country, I just feel like that for our area we need to start looking at this now, because it may well be that some things that were done in our county were not done in other areas, and you know that I've raised this issue about contracts and things before, but I don't know the full depth of it all. But I wouldn't like to think that we just wait for what could be a government review that either never comes or comes years down the line. when actually we need to be looking at it now whilst the people who've been involved are still here and will still be able to remember what's happened and the paperwork's there and all of the rest of it. Because the trouble is that when you do a review years down the line, frequently you don't actually get the real answers that you need. And I think we should be looking at it now.
Comments noted, Mark, thanks. David Boyce.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to throw in the mix, I think something that was being discussed quite a bit today is how we're going to be managing expectations, because as Tom said, the economy, national economy shrunk by 7%. This is on top of the shrinking of the economy after 2008. I think we're getting about 40 pence for every pound we were getting in 2010 of the austerity programme. There's undoubtedly going to be more austerity on the back of what's happened with COVID. There isn't going to be a great deal of money left. We've got all the low-hanging fruit. So I think for any new members coming in and existing members, how are we going to manage expectations going forward and just try and stress upon people the things that we could do 10, 15 years ago, we're not going to be able to do. Now, I don't know how we can sort of factor this into what Scrutiny is going to be doing, but it is something we need to bear in mind.
Thanks, David. I think that ties in exactly with the point I raised about the corporate risk heat map, where the points that you've raised are tied very closely to future funding regimes, either through the comprehensive spending review, the fair funding review, social care green paper, a whole host of issues that we need to be aware of and that new members need to be aware of, because if you can't get the restrictions right, if you're not aware of what the issues are ahead, it makes it very difficult as an authority to plan ahead. So those comments are noted as well. So thanks everyone for your comments on that, on the future work programme. They'll be taken away, disseminated to the relevant thematic scrutiny committees, and they'll go in front of each of those thematic scrutiny committees and the new management board after the elections in May. So are we happy to accept the recommendation for item 8? In the absence of dissent, we'll take that as consent. Thank you, members. Item 9 is any other business. I haven't received any other item of business. So in effect, that concludes the meeting. But before we sign off, you're all aware this is the last management board of this council and the last scrutiny committee of this council. So before we go, I'd like to thank members for their participation, for all the comments that they've made. We've had disagreements, we've come through them. So I'd like to thank you all for taking part in committee meetings over the years, all of the committee meetings, not just this management board. So I know most of you sit on other thematic groups as well. We may not meet again after the elections in May. That's not a decision we can make, but there is one consistency, and that is the officers will still be here in May when we come back, those of us who come back. And I'd like to thank them as well, because if it wasn't for their work and their commitment to providing us with the information that we need to survive the scrutiny committees, then we wouldn't have scrutiny committees. So thanks to each and every one of the officers that we have for their work that they've put into the scrutiny committees over the years, and we may see you soon. I've got a couple of members indicating that they wish to speak. Mark and then Richard Bell.
Yeah, Chair, can I just echo on behalf of everyone in my party that we wouldn't be here doing these scrutiny meetings if it wasn't for the officers. I know how much time it takes to put reports together, to sort things out, and I applaud them for the work they've done, especially whilst dealing with all of, I assume everybody's will have had personal issues over the last 12 months as well, with lockdown and being stuck at home and not being able to deal with the things that you'd like to deal with. And I'd also like to say to yourself, Chair, we don't always agree. That's part of politics, it's part of scrutiny. Whilst I don't always agree with the decisions on what I suggest, I do agree that you do chair the meetings in a very good way, and if it is your group leading the council in a few weeks' time, I'll look forward to seeing you back here. If it's not, who knows who it might be.
Thanks for that, Mark. Richard?
I'd just like to echo Mark's comments. I probably disagree less often than Mark does, but then again, that probably applies to most people. But we've been a very good chair, so thanks. And I do feel we make a difference, so thanks for that. Councillor Crewton, yes, look forward to seeing people back, or everybody who wants to come back, obviously, in a few weeks' time. Thanks, Chair.
So I've got the endorsement of the Lib Dems and the Tories to go on the election leaflets. Thanks very much, lads. Anyway, that's the end of the meeting. Thanks everybody. Dem services are going to close the meeting soon, so it remains safe until they do so. Thanks, and we'll see you all again soon.